The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into madness.
Open your mind.
And we are back to another edition of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late, but tonight is going to be a really fun show. I think people are really going to dig it. I'm joined by Genevieve. Genevieve, how you doing?
I'm doing quite all right.
Doing
Thank
all right?
you very much.
Did you survive Halloween and all the madness that was going on this weekend?
Nope, definitely not.
You're here in spirit.
I am here in spirit, but Don't worry, I'm still in the chat.
That's one thing. You're haunting the chat. Yeah, no, a lot of cool stuff happened this weekend. Obviously, we were covering the the Stanley Kamikaze Convention here in LA. We also went to a paranormal investigation hosted by Haunted Orange on Friday night. Obviously, Saturday was a big Halloween day, and that was a really busy day. It was a lot of fun. And then today, we want to send a special birthday shout out to a good friend of ours, good friend of the show, Mr. Chad Lindbergh. Happy birthday to you, sir.
Happy birthday.
Have a supernatural, fast and furious, badass birthday.
Supernatural. Yeah.
Boy, did you see that they set up a little quiz with his face from
really
different
difficult.
movies? And let me tell you,
I didn't even know he'd been in those movies.
Exactly.
That's how
There
bad
were
I am.
movies here that was, you were in this one too.
It's like, not that I wouldn't expect it. I just had no idea I'm such a bad friend.
Yeah, no, but no, I mean, big happy birthday to Chad.
And tomorrow we'll be crashing and sleeping all day.
Well, not so much, because tomorrow is Dia de los Muertos. I shouldn't have put an accent on it because I'm Hispanic. I should have just said it. Dia de los Muertos. That's tomorrow.
Wait, that was without an accent.
What is that?
That was an ultra accent.
Oh, dear. Okay. Well, I tried, folks. But no, definitely a lot of good stuff this weekend. And tonight, it's the pinnacle of my weekend. Not only because I get to do this show, but because tonight we have a very, very cool guest. I think cool is the word you want to use.
Yeah.
Right?
Super cool.
Yeah. So take it away, Genevieve.
Born in the 60s and a talk radio host for pretty much most of his life, Clyde Lewis is definitely an expert at this point in all things paranormal, parapolitical, and conspiracy related. Clyde's career commenced in Utah in 82, and it was in 95 that he created Ground Zero back in Salt Lake City. And since then, he's produced Ground Zero programs online, on radio, and on television. As well as that, he's appeared on a number of television programs, including Sightings, Strange Universe, and the Discovery Channel special Return to the Bermuda Triangle. On top of that, he's been published in a number of magazines, including a feature in Rolling Stone, and he's even the model for characters in books such as Safe House, Supernatural Law, and Alien Invasion. A big supporter of B-horror movies, comic books, mythology, and sci-fi, Lewis has published his own fanzines, as well as co-written scripts for TV and radio. His credits include his appearance in Nightfall, a movie he co-wrote with Kevin DeLudo, alongside roles in Box Elder, where he played Cage, and Citizen Toxie, the Toxic Avenger 4, providing the voice of the title character.
That's what I'm talking about.
And as of now, Lewis is working with lawyer and personal investigator Galen Cook on the D.B. Cooper case, specifically focusing on Wolfgang Gossett, who was actually a one-time associate of Lewis's, as well as a new suspect in this mysterious case.
Wow.
So, gosh, let me take a breath, but with that, we'd love to introduce Clyde Lewis to West of the Rockies.
Yes, Clyde, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you fine. I just was thinking I should read my bio more. I forgot I did all those things. I've done all those things in my life. And it just piles up and piles up and piles up. I get to a point of, did I really do that? Yeah, I did do that. I remember that now. My brain's all foggy. You know how that goes.
That's impressive.
Foggy the brain.
You have an impressive resume. Please tell me you are not good at cooking or something, please.
Something,
because
just one thing.
Anything.
I'm a great cook. I'm a great cook. I just regret that I didn't make anything Mexican Day for Dia de los Muertos.
Right.
I would love, but you say I have until tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yes.
This spring and, I have some chorizo and eggs or something. Huevos y chorizo y todo. You know, I just have something like that for.
We haven't had dinner yet. Don't say this.
Do you think if I hop in my car and head up north, I can get there in time, Clyde?
Well, there's still plenty of times to have, polenta or something else.
Nice.
Go really cheap. We'll have some polenta and a bunch of other stuff. But in Argentina, we would have something like milanesa. But I think milanesa in Mexico.
Yeah, they do have it. Yeah, they have their own take on it.
Oh, really? Well, yeah, they have the Italian style milanesa in Argentina. So I don't know what I would have. I'd have carnitas. That's what I want. Carnitas.
Delicious.
I want carnitas. They both, yeah. So there you go.
Oh boy, way to whet my appetite here, Clyde. But it's been a busy weekend for you guys up there as well, because I heard that the Ground Zero store just opened this weekend. Correct? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, for the longest time, Ground Zero, I think it's been since 1999. We haven't really merchandised anything Ground Zero. We had some wonderful artwork and some wonderful things were put together some 10 years ago for the show that we were marketing, but we weren't actively doing so because we really didn't know how to push it ourselves. Back then, it was just a small staff of me and maybe one or two other people. I did have somebody who was remarkable working for me named Mimi Cruz, and she was always out there doing things for me. She ran our comic book store there in Salt Lake City. So we really didn't do any, I guess you could call it real marketing of anything. And so Ron Patton, my producer, who is also the publisher of Steam Shovel Press and Paranoia Magazine, being my producer, he's very much into marketing and merchandising. And so we were able to get a hold of a sports merchandiser who had a little bit of a, he felt like that he wanted to help Ground Zero out by getting us some amazing stuff that we use for merchandise. And of course, Matt Haley, the man who brought us Superman, the guy who draws the Superman comic, is the man who designed the Ground Zero logo way back when. And it was when I was looking for investors for my podcast. And he showed up at one of my investor meetings and he said, I'm a big fan of Ground Zero. I said, my name's Matt Haley. And I said, oh, hello, Matt. How are you? And he said, I'm a comic book designer. And he did a comic book that I was reading. I had no idea, called G.I. Spy, which I really enjoyed. It was about Nazi flying saucers.
Oh, wow.
And also he helped design some of the, I guess you could call it the panels for Captain America with Red Skull. And so it was really kind of a fun thing. And he created the Ground Zero logo. And I said, well, what do I owe you for? And he says, nothing. He says, you can use it for the rest of your life.
Oh, wow.
And I thought to myself, there it was sitting collecting dust, not getting merchandise. And so we took the artwork and put it on T-shirts, mugs, and all kinds of things in hopes that people out there who want Ground Zero merchandise will want to purchase it, like a T-shirt or something. Because a lot of people have been telling me that they're really, they're really excited for it and they want to see some merchandising. So we're going to start merchandising some of the show and see if people really want to have, a Ground Zero hoodie or a Ground Zero T-shirt or a Ground Zero whatever, a mug. I don't know.
Right.
That's really cool.
It's fantastic. I'm excited about it. I really am. We had a good turnout for the store. We're going to be putting it online pretty soon, so that way people who are not locally from Portland or the Northwest, we have people coming all the way from Washington State. And so it was really amazing.
That is really cool.
All big excitement. Yeah, it was great.
That sounds amazing, and I must say that the logo definitely, I think, shows the type of show that you do. And actually, I wanted to talk to you about that. You've had a great career, and you've done some really amazing things. How did you get started on tackling this subject matter? These conspiracies and the paranormal and such.
Well, I was raised in a family that. Well, my father was more or less a conspiracy guy. He would talk about the latest conspiracy theories, and then I hooked up with another gentleman who got me my start in radio, really. His name was Steve Stay, who was into conspiracy theories. And then I met Wolfgang Gossett, who was a priest in the old Antioch faith, and he had a show similar to Ground Zero's a long time ago, and he introduced me to people. Well, he didn't introduce me really to people, except for I did meet William Cooper.
Oh, yeah.
And just a number of people that were into this kind of stuff, and they talk about this kind of stuff, and I was like, sucking it all in, and then Wolfgang, of course, gave me the most information. He was the most impressionable, and that's why it's interesting to note that he actually is the man that people are looking into, maybe being D.B. Cooper. And that to me is, amazing. I mean, when I found that out, I was just so overwhelmed because I was thinking if there was any guy who would be D.B. Cooper, it would be Wolfgang Gossett. And I to this day, I'm so proud that I knew him, and I'm so proud that, we worked together on some projects, and of course, then he, being as elusive as he was, come to find out he moved to Depot Bay, Oregon, right after I moved to Portland, and he was out in Depot Bay, which is far away from Portland, but still. And then, of course, found out I was like maybe 20 minutes away from the drop site where D.B. Cooper landed in the Northwest. So I'm just thinking, I got thrust into the D.B. Cooper investigation type stuff because D.B. Cooper really wasn't that big of a deal for me in Salt Lake City, but moving to the Northwest, I mean, you got Bigfoot, UFOs, and D.B. Cooper, all three of these things up here. And, most people say, what about, Roswell? What about, well, I say, take a look back about what happened before Roswell. You'll find Mount Rainier, you'll find Maury Island, you'll even find Portland, a number of UFO sightings in Portland that J. Edgar Hoover had to investigate. But, it's a heritage, and being up here in the Northwest, I find myself privileged to be in the middle of all of it. And, in fact, a lot of people are finding, like with the TV show Grimm, and, of course, the Twilight series was filmed here, and it's just because here it's like it's kind of like what's up in Alaska. I mean, it's kind of like Twilight, 24 hours.
It seems that it has that vibe, yeah.
I always told people that I would say to people, I wish that they would serve breakfast 24 hours a day at McDonald's because this is a breakfast place. It's just like every day you wake up, it's like morning. You never really feel like that. That's why you drink a lot of coffee here. That's why you're in a place that it's morning maybe 24 hours a day. You don't realize until when the sun goes down. What was there a day? What happened? There was no day here. So I mean, it's always welcome to have coffee. It's always welcome to have. I guess you could say chicken and waffles whenever you turn around. So it's a nice vibe. I love the Northwest. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, no, it's great. I've had a couple of opportunities to travel in that direction. It's lovely. I mean, Northern California and up, it's definitely, some of my favorite places. A second ago, you were mentioning William Cooper, Bill Cooper. I remember that for me, that was a very mind-opening experience. I remember the first time I read his book, Behold the Pale Horse. If I remember correctly, I read it probably a month or two after 9/11 back in 2001. So it had it kind of took on this meaning at the time. And shortly after that same year, I believe it was in November, William Cooper died. There was a lot of controversy as to, how he died. Obviously, in his book, he said, if I'm ever killed, and I'm paraphrasing poorly, but it was something along the lines that if it was ever killed, to look to the Masons for, the culprits. What did you make of that? Do you believe that there was a conspiracy to assassinate Bill Cooper, or do you think he just unfortunately was caught up in a bad situation?
No, I think Bill Cooper was a loudmouth drunk, and I'm not saying he was drunk all the time, but I'm saying that he drank a lot, and he was a very tough man, he was very aggressive. He fought for what he believed in, and he was an amazing man. But I think that, he mouthed off to the cops and they shot him.
Right.
I don't think there's a conspiracy behind it at all. Maybe in someone's dreams there's a conspiracy. But see, that's the problem. It's always the out for people like me and people like Alex Jones and people like William Cooper and others. They can always say, when we die, if we ever die, heaven forbid, that it's some sort of conspiracy. I mean, for the longest time, with my health situation, people have thought there's a conspiracy to let me out. Maybe there is. In fact, even my doctor suggested that I was experiencing these things because I was a victim of some conspiracy.
Really?
People will believe people believe what they want. And I just think that, when I met Cooper, he loved beer, he loved life, he loved a lot of things. He was very knowledgeable about things. He had a lot of information. Yeah. And I think, what it was just a case of, the way police officers sometimes can be. If you do something, they'll shoot. And if they, and I don't know all the intricate details, but I remember his wife saying something about how don't think for 1 minute it's a conspiracy. It was something, William was a very tough, very vociferous individual, and I think that he went down fighting like he always does. He's a fighter. He's he played hard. He partied hard. He was a good man, and he drank a lot and he played a lot, and he was a very. But don't let that fool you. He was very good at what he did. Right. He was very smart, very intelligent. That kind of thing.
Yeah. What did you make of the, because I remember that I found this interesting, the quote-unquote prediction of 9/11 that he did on his radio show, I believe. That was quite interesting, and I mean, unfortunately, I didn't find out about it after the fact, but from what you know of Bill Cooper, are you surprised that he said something like that came to pass, or do you think that, he had the information to...
Like I said, I think Bill had his information. Like I said, I met him not a long time ago. I had to be back. Yeah. It was a really long time ago. I worked with a guy named Mills Crenshaw who actually has a foreword on the book, or not really a foreword, but he has a nice little blurb about how good the book is. And he was the real deal. I mean, that's the thing about him. He was the real deal. And I think a lot of people, they'll say what you will about him, but he had inside information. I don't think it was just some dumb luck. I think that he certainly, had that information. I think it's unfortunate what happened to him, but I think that, it's one of those things where, sometimes, you make a bad decision and things happen. Yeah. And it's like, it doesn't make the man any less of a hero or any more of a hero. He's just a good man who did a lot of great things and said a lot of great stuff. And, just unfortunately wound up being shot by police officers. Yeah. And I think it's unfortunate that happened, but, his wife said, well, it's not a big conspiracy, and I think people shouldn't read into it as anything more than just him, being him. Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm pooping on everybody's party by saying it. But,
no, it's quite all right.
I would rather have him go down as a man who believed in what he did, as a man who you could have a beer with and have fun with and talk to, and a man who had a great sense of humor, and a man who knew how to, treat people and how he was respectful of people. Back in the day, I was kind of a drinker, and people say I was a drunk too, but, it's like, it doesn't matter. People are people.
Yeah, of course.
It's not like, it's not like he was trying to be anything more than just a remarkable individual who influenced me and influenced you and influenced everybody else who just happened to be reading his book. His book was very influential. It did make its mark, and I tell people all the time, you need to read Behold the Pale Horse. You need to read Robert Anton Wilson. You need to read Joseph Campbell in order to understand and make heads or tails of this stuff. And so, he comes highly recommended for me. And, in fact, in the time I met him, I just thought that it was such an honor to meet him, and it was such a, and it's something that I can take with me for the rest of my life, and that's what I think is amazing about the man. So
no, he's even back then. I remember I saved my lunch money and ordered the VHS copy of the Zapruder film that he mentioned in his book. Your
lunch money meant for lunch.
That was amazing, wasn't it?
No, it was.
I mean, it's amazing. I don't know if I buy the theory of the guy in the front seat
exactly
Kennedy, but I don't always being a person who analyzes conspiracy. I'm not the guy. I'm sure they think every conspiracy that comes down the road I believe in, or everything I see I believe.
Right.
That's always a misconception about people who do shows anymore.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that, when you're doing a show like this, or when you guys talk about what you talk about, it's not that we find it fascinating. The listener has to think that you believe everything you say. Well, what I say is not what I believe. It's what I think is interesting. It's what I think is fascinating. And I may say, well, there are some things here that I find interesting that I may believe or I may think are interesting.
Right.
But, people are saying, and I think the biggest mistake of all is when, people who do talk shows like me and you and everybody else, they say, I'm giving you the truth. I'm giving you the truth. And I'm like thinking, well, it's the truth based on your research. It's the truth, I think, based on, your sources. And sometimes your sources may lie to you. And then what happens to that truth you're telling? And so I tell people I'm honest with what I talk about, and I'm honestly trying to find out the truth. But I don't know if I give it. I just know that I find what I'm talking about fascinating, and that's because, the reason why I say I don't know if I'm giving the truth or not is because I think people are so caught up in these people who do talk shows where they tell you, well, this is the truth this is the truth. They never say this is the truth as we see it. And it's always agendized. There's always an agenda behind it. There's always some sort of a political bend on it. And that's unfortunate, because I remember when talk radio was pure. I remember when talk radio you could say things and you could do things, and you could be, you could say things and do things that are honest and truthful. And you do so in such a creative way, and people would go, wow, that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something I've always thought about. Instead of, this is what I want you to believe, this is what I want you to think, And if you don't think or believe that way, you're not part of our little club. You're not part of our little clique.
Yeah.
And I just find that just unfortunate. They've done this with the collective consciousness of this country, where they've created both, liberal and conservative,
Right.
and there's nothing in between, and there's nothing out of the margins, there's nothing out of the lines, and I just find that very irritating, and it just aggravates me to think that it continues.
We've discussed it on the show quite a bit, the whole issue of politics. It's almost like wrestling. It's almost like, to me, it seems like a show, because these people behind closed doors, they probably go out and have a few beers themselves or something, But for the rest of us in the public, it seems like divide and conquer type of technique, and they put us in a Democrat or a Republican box. And the way it seems to me is that no matter who ends up being president, it just seems like there's some kind of agenda that just keeps being pushed forward, regardless, like I said, of who is heading the country. Do you think that there is something like a shadow government controlling some of the situations that happen in this country?
Oh, sure. Yes. Well, they admitted to it. During 9/11, they admitted to it. They said, yes, there's a shadow government that acts on behalf of the government. I believe there's a dark order, and I also believe there's a synarchy running the government, which means that there's a higher order, a higher power that they answer to. There's not a power or any order that we know of. I mean, all the other orders are out there, the Illuminati and all these other orders that we think we know run the world, and they don't. That's why whenever I get into arguments with people about, they always go after the Jewish conspiracy, they always go after the Jesuit conspiracy and the Masonic conspiracy and all these other conspiracies. And I say, yeah, these are interesting conspiracies to talk about, but the truth is there's probably a darker, much higher order that's ahead of those, and they answer to that order, and that's why they do what they do. I mean, we can vilify anyone. We can villainize anyone if we perceive they're in control. But if you're vilifying them because they're in control of you, then that means you've lost control of yourself. And I've always felt that to be very, very, that's another thing too, is that when you're involved with this type of talk and this type of presentation, there are several people out there that if you don't say enough about the Jews, or if you don't say enough about the Muslims, or you don't say enough about the Jesuits or the Catholics, or you don't say enough about them, they think that, you're being guarded. You can't say this because your Jewish handlers won't let you, or you. I always think to myself, where do these guys come from? And the thing is that the reason why it's not talked about all the time is not because of the fact that the Jewish handlers are telling them not to, and maybe in some cases it is. Hell, I don't know, but I don't experience that.
Okay.
I've never been told any time in my life, when I've done my shows, that the Jewish groups that are listening to my show, they'll tell you, they'll make judgment calls. But see, I don't work with Jewish handlers. I don't have Jewish handlers, nor do I have Jesuit handlers. I don't have any of those things, and yet there are plenty of things out there that say I do. There are plenty of things out there that say that I'm a shill for this or I'm a shill for that. And whatever happened to, hey, let's just listen and let's listen to this guy and not make a judgment call, because if he talks about certain things, there's an agenda behind him. And I blame the media for this. I blame the mainstream media for this. I blame radio media for this when they started doing this whole, you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, you're a liberal, you're a conservative, you're this, you're that. And I blame that because, people, of course, they want to talk about these topics, but sometimes they're like, there's no answer to these topics. There's no definitive way of answering it. And when you do, you're running into territory where you draw a thin line between hate, or you draw a thin line between bias. And that's why sometimes, people say, why don't you ever do a Scientology show? And I say, well, there's a fine line between, violating some sort of a trust, or violating some sort of a, situation where it's like when you're talking about Catholicism, and you want to point out that, the priests have been molesting little boys.
Right.
Okay, we all know that now. Well, just because I don't talk about it every so often doesn't mean I condone it. Doesn't mean I'm being told I can't talk about it. It's just it's a topic that when you talk about it, you talk in circles, and it just gets to the point where there's no solution, and you walk away unhappy. You walk away, kind of depressed about it. And there's several topics that I've taken on in the past that I figured this is like a one-time shot. It's like, in that old cartoon where Daffy Duck decides that he wants to drink gasoline and he wants to drink gunpowder, and then at the end he sets himself on fire and he explodes on the stage. He goes, "Oh, it's the most remarkable act you've ever done." He says, "Yeah, I know, but I can only do it once."
Right,
That's the thing
right.
I think about some of these topics. Yeah, it's the most remarkable topic I've ever done, but I can't do it again. I just don't feel like it. I walked away feeling worse because I did the topic rather than better.
Talking about topics, what are some of the topics that, every now and then I come across some things that I will literally lose, sleep over, thinking about it, trying to analyze it and try to make sense of it. What are some of the topics that, keep you up at night?
Anything nuclear keeps me up at night. Because being the grandson of a downwinder and spreading that to my family is something that I really have been concerned about because of the genetic, what it's done to me genetically and what it's done to my son genetically. Those are the things about, mutations and radiation and, because of course, this has made me prone to cancer, and I just don't want to have that C word being told again to me again, which made me even angrier because I just seem to think as though that's going to be the rest of my life is, going under the knife until someone says, "Hey, you can't take it anymore. You're going to die." I want to fight like hell to, make it work and to get over it. But yeah, nuclear scares are pretty scary for me. There's nothing really, I guess. I think the only thing is that's most scary is losing control, and that is control of my senses, control of my faculties, being under the being under the watchful eye of someone who's thinking that you're a certain way when you're really not, or people who overanalyze you or judge you or throw you into one little category, and you're trying like hell to say, "I'm not this way. I'm not this way. I'm not this way." And they basically put you in that, and they put you into that group. That's why whenever I'm on the air and I'm doing anything, I try to separate myself from other opinions that are being expressed on other talk shows or podcasts or anything else. And I guess that makes me, in some ways a party pooper because everybody thinks, well, Clyde obviously thinks that there was a plane that didn't go into there was no plane in the Pentagon. No, I believe a plane went into the Pentagon. I know a guy who drove cab for Washington, D.C. He saw the plane go into the Pentagon.
Oh, wow.
So, I trust this guy. He wouldn't lie to me. And he's not part of the Illuminati, and he's not any of those things. And I'd say, well, I know a guy that saw the plane go to the Pentagon. Well, look, there was no wreckage. I didn't see any wreckage. Well, just because you didn't see any wreckage doesn't mean squat. Just because you weren't there at 9/11 and you didn't see this happen doesn't mean squat. And another thing too is that I was at a conspiracy convention, and somebody asked me, says, "What stories are you planning on doing for the next year?" And I said, "Oh, I want to do a story on Building 6." And he goes, "Oh, you mean Building 7?" I go, "No, Building 6." "Oh no, Building 7. That's the one that I go, No, Building 6." And they said, "Why would you want to do a story on Building 6?" I says, "Because that's where they kept all the gold, that's where they kept all the records, that's where they kept everything." And that building exploded before the two towers were hit.
Oh, wow.
And nobody talks about that. Nobody talks about how Building 6 at World Trade Center exploded on its foundation before the planes even hit the two towers. And I said, I think that's a very intriguing story. While we know that they brought down all three of those buildings that we saw come down in a controlled demolition or with whatever, thermite or whatever they decided it was used.
Right.
We saw that. We witnessed it with our eyes, and it wasn't, conspiracy theorists brought this up. It was the mainstream media itself that suggested this. And I don't think anybody really knows that either. I think all the people who say, well, this is a conspiracy theory. No, it wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was reported by the mainstream news. Peter Jennings, all of these guys, Dan Rather, they all said, take a look at how this building has come down. Even Tom Brokaw, he says, when you watch a controlled demolition, this is exactly how it looks. And obviously, they brought these buildings down, and then immediately we forget that it was flushed down the memory hole, and then everything was changed to say it pancaked down. There's no question that all these buildings came down because of the fires and all this other stuff. And, you'll never convince anybody unless you can play them tapes, which I have. I have them, I've played them before on my show. Same with things like chemtrails. It was,
Right.
chemtrails, that's so stupid. I said, well, do they know that a 1986 report by John Chancellor on NBC News was talking about how these trails coming out of jet aircraft could manipulate the weather and also could be used for geoengineering. In the future, they may use them to, see the skies with something that could cause weather changes. And, and I remember that report, and I found it, and I played it on my show. And I think a lot of people still aren't convinced that, this whole idea of the lingering contrails or the chemtrails or what you want to call them are a reality, and that, who knows what's going on, but we know that they are draping the skies with this stuff. And so, either way, you have a fascinating story that people want to dismiss out of hand because they think that, some tinfoil hat wearing bozo is out there making this stuff up, and they're really not. I mean, this is something that's planted. Even the mainstream media gave us the word flying saucer. I mean, you look at the print media, and when they interviewed Kenneth Arnold, they said, so, tell us, Kenneth, what did you see? Well, I saw these flying shields in the sky, and they skipped around the sky like a saucer on water.
Right.
Oh, so you saw a flying saucer, something like that. And ever since then, flying saucer was being used to describe, what they saw. And then, of course, UFO, unidentified flying object, was merely an unidentified aerial craft that no one really recognized. Didn't mean it's aliens were piloting it. It just meant it was some strange craft. Now a UFO is meant to signal, it signals to people what people are seeing is a unidentified craft piloted by aliens or piloted by extraterrestrials. And so, when people say, do you believe in UFOs? You say, well, what do you mean? Do I believe that unidentified flying objects exist? Well, of course they do. Do you believe, I don't know if they're piloted by aliens. I don't know if they're piloted by extraterrestrials, but yes, I believe that there are things out there that we see that we don't understand, and it could be natural, it could be something else.
Right.
So, they always like to throw these trick questions out there because people and the media itself will not, in my opinion, definite or direct or anything about any of this stuff, and so it becomes, kind of catchwords, buzzwords, phrasing that kind of gets us into trouble, and it's gotten me into trouble before, and it gets me into trouble sometimes, but I tend to be more, I try to be more, I don't know, I want to be more clear about stuff like this, but it seems that UFO now, the definition is unidentified spacecraft or unidentified flying object powered by aliens, which is difficult to try and explain.
It's funny because you mentioned that first UFO sighting. They gave us the word flying saucer. I remember looking at the photograph of this gentleman holding up an illustration of what he claims to have seen. It almost looked like a boomerang shape. It definitely did not look like a flying saucer. But I remember thinking that it was very similar to the B-2 bomber or some of these single-wing aircrafts that later we found out that the Germans had been working on, and then the U.S. had experimented with sometime, I think it was in the 50s or 60s. I apologize if my facts are wrong in that one. But I just found it interesting how it kind of looked like that. You mentioned Ron Patton earlier. He works with you, and Ron Patton's a great guy. I've known him for a few years now. And it's a funny story, the way I got in touch with Ron. I believe it was in the early days of the internet, around 97, 98. We had just gotten internet at my home. There wasn't a whole lot going on in the internet back in those days. And I came across this article with the title Aliens and Demons Clothing, which, I went on to read and I found fascinating. And I remember saving it, and I even printed a copy of this. And fast forward some years later, I started doing this show, and I remember that article, and I began, Googling and looking for it. Finally, I found it, and at the bottom, the name of the author was none other than Ron Patton. I proceeded to stalk him on Facebook and had him as a guest on my show, and he's been on the show on several occasions now, and he's, like I said, a great guy. We love Ron, and we want to send a big hello to him. But I wanted to ask you, what is your take on, we're talking about, UFOs and who's flying these things. What is your take on these entities that seem to be flying in these aircraft? Is it alien? Are they interdimensional? Is it just all, the government? In all your years, obviously, exploring this topic, what conclusions have you come to, if any?
Well, I would say this, and this is kind of I guess you could call it a part-by-part thing. I would say this. I would say that most of the things that we see in the sky are not piloted by aliens. I think they're probes. They're probably observing probes that come down, or maybe even robotically piloted probes that come down and observe. That would be, that would be the first thing, because what do most civilizations do. I mean, they send a satellite out there, or they send a robot down to explore the planet's surface or whatever. So I'm thinking most of the things we see that are in the sky that we think are, extraterrestrial, they could be extraterrestrial. But they're not piloted by anybody, because you got to figure, these are very small craft. It'd be the equivalent of, flying a Volkswagen Bug into the sky and landing it somewhere. I mean, they're very small. Now, there are bigger craft that we've been seeing, and perhaps these smaller craft come from a bigger craft. That's something to think about. Right. But I'm thinking that what we see is not always what we think we're getting. Of course, the whole thing is in our minds put together, where if there's a flying saucer, there's got to be aliens piloting it. Not necessarily. If there's a flying saucer seen in the sky, obviously they're here and they're interested in us. Not necessarily. It's just that sometimes I think we let the typical mundane nature of our programming get the best of us, so we don't stop and think to ourselves that it could be probes, it could be weapons, it could be, and then of course there is that rare occasion we may see or may think that aliens are piloting something, but I would say, and then of course, we have to, throw out the outrages and say, well, wait a minute, maybe this is something that we've created that we have no understanding of, and that we're seeing it, we're thinking it's being piloted by aliens. I always go back to the story that, and people will tell me that I'm wrong here, but I don't really think I'm too far off the map when I tell you that I think that this type of knowledge has been gained and has been lost over and over again throughout time, and the aliens have to continue to remind us who's watching over us and who's in charge, and so they make contact with governments secretly, and they meet with them, and then governments are well aware of what they are. They don't know what they're going to be doing, because their motives and their modus operandi is very, very, it's erratic. It's not necessarily something that it's not consistent. And so the reason why they don't tell the public is because if we were to tell everybody that, hey, they're friendly aliens and they love us all, we would go into that going, oh, they love us all. And then when they turn on us, we'll go, wait a minute, the government lied to us about it. And I think that many times deals have been made and have been broken. And I think probably the most written about story is the idea the aliens made a deal with Nazis, and the Nazis, were the ones that had all the intelligent machinery, the Wunderwaffen and all that stuff. And then they had flying saucers, and then they decided to take from those flying saucer designs, aircraft that could be piloted by rockets and all that other stuff. And so whatever happened at Roswell could have been a combination of both alien and human, or human only, or because you have to understand that when Project Paperclip happened, all those German soldiers and those German scientists came over here. Where were the first UFO sightings? They were in the Northwest. What is one of the biggest manufacturers at the time? Well, aerospace. You have Boeing, Martin Marietta, you have JPL. All these companies were based in the Northwest, and they still are. Of course, Boeing is, that's the first thing you see when you go into Seattle. So, this aircraft that they were using or testing or whatever was seen by a lot of people. Kenneth Arnold, the Mariana Affair, all that stuff. And then, of course, 1 week later or 2 weeks later, they have a huge crash at Roswell. And, of course, some of the German scientists were at Los Alamos, White Sands, in Ohio, and they were testing all this stuff at the time. So just saying that they were testing machinery that crashed at Roswell isn't saying the aliens weren't involved in some way. If the aliens did get that technology of the Nazis, then yes, the aliens were involved, and the technology was trying to be perfected and back engineered even during that time, even before Area 51 was even thought about. So contemplate that for a moment and say to yourself, well then, yes, aliens did influence it, but were the aliens there at Roswell? Well, it's anyone's guess. They say they were, but so far the evidence at hand does not demonstrate either yay or nay. It just basically you have eyewitness testimony, and those eyewitnesses are dying. So there you go.
It always seemed to me when I began to look into Project Paperclip that it looked like just a continuation of the Nazi secret space program, I guess, if I could use the term to describe it in that way, because as soon as they came over, you're right, the UFO sightings started. At the same time, do you think that there is a possibility the Eisenhower alien treaty. Do you think that something like that happened? And is that why we had alien abductions and things of that nature in the subsequent decades?
Well, it's all in the history, and that's the thing, is that it's in the history, and the only thing is all the things we have are the accounts in the history.
Mm-hmm.
There's always other stories, too, that we know about or we hear about, and most of them are hearsay. I don't know if I believe them.
Mm-hmm.
I know they certainly are fascinating, and they're worth talking about. And so I would say that there had to have been something that went on in the 1950s to actually, give us these so-called alien, give us these alien stories about abduction and all the other stuff that were involved. And so those are the things that I think, that we need to pay attention to, is that, we need to go through the histories. We need to look at, like, Blue Book. We need to look at the Majestic 12 documents. We need to look at all those things, because those things are going to be able to tell us. Most people, I'm sure, have not read them, or that they've skimmed through them. Because, we're looking at documents that are government documents that are mostly blacked out. Yeah. And I think people lose their patience, and they don't want to go through them because this is too much, too hard. And we live in times with attention spans that don't last too long. So you have to really be into research. You have to really be into all this stuff to understand it. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I still am learning new things. I still find new things I didn't think that I'd find. I still, go, well, where was I when this was being talked about? Where was I when this happened?
Right.
Like this, for example, tonight I was looking at a video, actually not a video, but it was a preview for something called The Visit, which is actually a sanctioned UN movie that was at the Sundance Film Festival back in February. And I think they were going to release it, or they did release it earlier in the month to be watched. And the first time I got to see it was just a few days ago, and I finally had the opportunity to watch some of it today. And it actually has scientists and the UN and several other groups saying, what would actually happen if aliens came to Earth. And now Popular Science is writing a story about this visit video, and this is after so many things have indicated that there may be life on Mars, or there may be life, the Kepler planets and all this. So it's finally coming out, and now they're taking it very seriously. The UN is taking it very seriously now, and they're putting out videos and things to prepare us and get our mindset for this possibility.
Right.
So that's the thing I find fascinating.
No, it's true. It's true. And it seems like we're heading in that direction. Speaking of heading in any kind of given direction, we're going to be taking our top of the hour break in just a few minutes. But first, let me ask you about something really interesting, Clyde, because I think, as most people know, I'm a big Pink Floyd fan. And I was reading that you hosted, for a while, you were hosting a show called In the Pink. And you were among the first to begin synchronizing Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon to the movie Wizard of Oz. Did I read that correctly? Because that is super cool.
I was on a radio show, WRKO, Jeff Katz show in Boston. And it was after there was a huge article about me in Radio Records magazine about Ground Zero. And he was asking me questions about, my heritage, my background. I said, I hosted a show called In the Pink. It was about Pink Floyd. And I said a number of people that I knew at the time, a number of radio programmers and people that were involved, were actually getting together, and we were having these parties, Pink Floyd parties and stuff. And I was doing a show called In the Pink, where I was playing all kinds of Pink Floyd music. And, I was very, interested in this. But it went all the way back to high school, when I was stoned once listening to a Pink Floyd album. I actually had seen the Wizard of Oz playing at the time that the album was playing. I thought it was kind of interesting, but I never really explored it too much later in life until I wanted to deal with synchronicities and talk about those things. And so by accident, we actually were experimenting with a little place called Telescene, which was this huge television editing bay that was provided by a little television station called KUTV, Channel 2 in Salt Lake City. And I worked with Kevin DeLulo, who I did Nightfall with. And we kind of put it together with everybody, a bunch of radio people, showed it at the Tower Theater. We also showed Pink Floyd in Pompeii, live in Pompeii. And we just did it as a joke. And then a woman named Zandy Holden, who ran the planetarium there, we did Laser Dark Side of the Moon, where we had laser show with our synchronization, which was really
That's cool.
And then I was on Jeff Katz's show, and I told him that we were doing it. And then a week later, the Boston Globe reported the 2 DJs in Boston did it, and I guess they got all the credit for it, or somebody did. And then everybody was talking about how they did it, and everybody said they did it. And then I did an interview with Alan Parsons, and I told him, give us some details that he didn't know. And he told me, he says, oh my gosh, he says, you have too much time on your hands. He told me, and I said, no, I said, it's just many times just, winding away the hours stoned and watching Wizard of Oz and other movies and just kind of having fun with the soundtracks. And I would synchronize Pink Floyd music to other music, Led Zeppelin, other songs. It was because of the fact that I was probably one of the first guys to do mashups like that. I think I was kind of a pioneer in mashup and a bunch of other things. Now there are people out there that mash up better than I do, or even because they got all the equipment to do it. But we had to do it with like 2 turntables. We had to do it with matching beats. We had to do it with and sometimes it wouldn't work. It would sound like garbage.
Yeah.
We didn't have the equipment they have now where they can take out sound and add drums and all this other stuff. So, you got people out there that are really good, like DJ Schmoll, and you got like Celdweller and all these other people out there, that are out there that do this kind of stuff. And I marvel at their wonderful talent, and I find mashup to be a fascinating phenomenon. Most people don't, but I think it's amazing.
Yeah, no, it really is. And I must say, I remember the first time I watched The Wizard of Oz with the Dark Side of the Moon record synced up. It was really cool. There's a question in the chat that says,
I was going to say, there's been a few coming up, but just so we don't miss this one because it's related. KP in the chat asks, Clyde, which time do you sync it up to? Is it when the lion roars 3 times or the cowardly lion roars?
It's after the 3rd roar the MGM lion makes. You start. We did it with the record album. We didn't do it with CDs. That's how old we are, folks. We did it with Dark Side of the Moon album, and it was difficult then to do with the album. But it's interesting to note that for some reason this is timed so well that at the end of the Big Gig in the Sky, where it finally ends, and Dorothy walks towards the door, it gives you plenty of time to take the album off the turntable, put it down, and put it down again. And when she opens the door to walk into, Munchkin Land, it goes right into Money by Pink Floyd. So, I mean, they kind of timed it for when the house crashes down and she's walking through the house to get to the door. In that time, you're supposed to hurry, take the record off the turntable, put it back on, and then set the record again. By the time she opens the door, Money begins. So, that's how you do it with a record. With a CD, that's something that, you do the 3rd roar, and then after Big Gig in the Sky happens, you have to then, I think, pause it to do it right. And then once you hear Money, you turn Money on, the song Money, when she opens the door to walk into Munchkin Land, and that's when it starts again, and it works again. Some people have synced it past the Tin Man's heart beating. We never did. We knew at the end of the record when we heard the heart beating at the end of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, that this was the Scarecrow and Dorothy listening in to the Tin Man's heart. But we never had anything left over for the Cowardly Lion or even Meeting the Wizard. So people have done that, too. They've gone synced it up again after the album's over with, and I just don't think it works any further beyond the Tin Man and his heart beating. So that's as far as we went when we did it, but I'm sure there are plenty of other people out there that have done more.
And I remember reading, like I said, I'm a huge Pink Floyd fan, and I remember reading that when they started out in Cambridge, they used to play these little gigs, and they would have a projector with these very, acidy, psychedelically patterns, and they would sit there playing along to the patterns, and that's why I thought that it was quite possible that, they probably, did this for a laugh.
Yeah, well, they did soundtracks too, that, right? They did Zabriskie Point, and that's what they were doing. They were doing many soundtracks for movies back then, and they were doing their own music. And of course, What is the Wall but a major soundtrack for a movie that wasn't even made yet? And they made the movie around the record, and it still was a fantastic movie. And in fact, that was another pioneering thing too, is that what they did is they made the first real MTV type video that was basically a whole album, not just a song. It was a whole album set to video, which I think is amazing. And speaking of Video Killed the Radio Star, that's probably the biggest, really blockbuster video. Just a thriller. that caught the people's attentions, and that was before Thriller. So think about that.
It's mind blowing. I remember my dad, when I was a little kid, my dad would try to explain to me how Pink Floyd were ahead of their time, and as a 7-year-old, I would just look at him perplexed, going like, "What?" But obviously, I got to the age where I got it, and that's all I got to say about that.
They're very timeless for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Clyde, can you hang on the line just for a few minutes, and we're gonna resume this conversation on the other side of the break, if that's all right?
That's fine. Yes.
Awesome. Alrighty. And since we're talking about Pink Floyd, and Clyde mentioned the song Money, I think it's quite appropriate that we go out with some Pink Floyd, Money, from Dark Side of the Moon. The one, you got to flip the record at, to get this track to get it to. Actually, I had to deal with CDs, so yeah. But I missed the record part. But
you weren't flipping CDs.
Yeah, no. But then actually they started selling bootleg VHSs with the Dark Side of the Moon album, already included, and I think that's the one I ended up getting.
Kind of a downgrade, though.
Well, back in those days, right? Anyways, guys, don't go away. What's the Rockies is gonna be right back. Enjoy this song. Our guest tonight, Clyde Lewis of the amazing Ground Zero Radio. You think this guy knows a lot? Check out his radio show. He dissects topics like nobody else. Enjoy this jam. We're going to be right back. Some Pink Floyd.
West of the Rockies with Frank.
What's up, guys? This is Jorge Diaz of Paranormal Activity, The Marked Ones, and you're listening to West of the Rockies with Frank. This portion of the show is sponsored by Haunted Orange County, your premier source for all things haunted in and around OC. From haunted history ghost walks to ghost group hunting expeditions at some of SoCal's most haunted destinations. Make your fall plans early and book an upcoming tour or investigation today. Visit hauntedoc.com.
Open your mind.
And we are back to the second hour of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late, but we're having a great time tonight. As always, I'm Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook. Check out the website, WoTRradio.com, and follow the show on Twitter, WoTRradio. Genevieve Yue on Twitter there. Mm-hmm. And you can catch her on her very own show on this station at 9 p.m. No added flavors, music, jokes, facts.
Thursdays, every Thursday.
Yep. Our guest tonight is none other than Mr. Clyde Lewis of Ground Zero Radio. And you can check him out. Well, check out his website, or you can check him out as well. groundzeromedia.org. Follow him on Twitter at Clyde Lewis, and go check out his Facebook page, facebook.com/Ground Zero Radio. Let me bring Clyde back into the conversation here. Clyde, can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can. Very much so.
Awesome. Thank you again for being on the show. And by the way, thank you for your candid responses to all our questions. And it's always fun to have somebody that can just honestly answer some of these questions that, they're really complex. A lot of these questions don't have a yes or no answer. So, we really appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they hear somebody on the air, they think this is the way the person is. And people are always saying, when I do these interviews like this, Clyde's not what we expected him to be. And I don't have to be anything. I'm just me. And I think people who meet me, they're very surprised about, my attitudes about things like this and how I feel about them. And it's not like, I think people tend to think that those who talk about these type of subjects live, drink, eat, and sleep them. Mm-hmm. No, we don't. I'm a typical guy. I put my pants on one leg at a time, and and I watch silly TV shows, and I can be a fanboy sometimes. I go to comic conventions, and
nice.
And then I spend time with my fiance and her son, and all these other things. Mm-hmm. And I think if people really were to think about what I do when I'm not on the radio, they'd say, well, this guy's just like anybody else. Mm-hmm. And I always get the idea that I'm just some, rich guy getting paid by the Illuminati or getting paid by, big money. And I'm saying, no, I'm really not. And this one guy wrote me once, says, obviously you're part of the Illuminati just because I flipped a But I was with a rock star friend of mine who happens to be in a band called Black Lodge, and I gave a kind of a goofy, devil symbol where I used both hands instead of one. This guy goes, obviously you're in the Illuminati, and I wrote him back and I said, well, if I'm in the Illuminati, I wouldn't be doing a radio show, A, and B, I'd be trying to take over the world, and C, I would eliminate Kanye West and the Kardashians if I were in the Illuminati. So,
nice.
And people tend to just let their imaginations run wild. And I remember Alice Cooper once said, he says, just let them use the publicity. And I'm like thinking, yeah, but it's one thing to say that it's one thing to say that you did something on stage than it is to have people actually put in print on a Facebook page or somewhere else that you've done this, and or you're in the middle of this, because it's like, I deal with people every day on a level other than a radio level. And it's like I tell people, don't ever believe what's in my Wikipedia page, especially beyond the facts, because to be quite honest, there's actually a guy out there, and he knows who he is. He's from San Diego, and he basically vandalizes my page
Oh, wow.
on a daily basis, and it just got to the point where I couldn't keep up with it anymore. And so most of the stuff you read on my Wikipedia page is nonsense. It's just not real.
That's insane.
And they link to these spurious magazines, these spurious, things that are just not even. And then they use my own articles that I write, my research papers I write, as saying that this is what I truly believe, and therefore I'm not to be trusted about certain things. Just because I talk about subjects that are controversial, so I'm bringing them up, I must truly believe in them, rather than saying, well, he brings up these topics, they're very controversial, and no word on whether or not he truly believes this. And I tell people, well, I mean, it's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of analyzing a story. It's a matter of exploring the story, and then my beliefs are my own. And when people try to pry them out of me, I always say, well, it's a none of your thing. And they go, what does none of you mean? I says, it's none of your damn business. That's what it is. It's none of your business. So, I mean, I like to try to keep my beliefs to myself, because I always say to people that, it's where you keep your mind, you keep it where they can't get at it. Keep it at ground zero, meaning keep it open for, beginning and end, and clean and not clean, and anything else that comes your way, because, identifying yourself with a certain philosophy or ideology, I feel, makes it all rigid and keeps you confined to one space. I always feel more liberated when I can keep my mind open and say, I don't know if I believe this, but I certainly find it fascinating. I don't know, and I can say it with such conviction because I find it fascinating.
Right.
And I think the arguments, because I really love debate. And when I was in high school, I was in debate, and one of the things I thought was interesting in debate is that they would never give you a topic in debate that you didn't either A, have to argue for, or B, argue against. And so, let's say, for example, it was a thing about education and who deserves it, and who doesn't deserve it. And I was once given this debate. I had a debate that minorities are slower than whites. And I said, I don't believe this. Why would I even try to debate it? Well, it's debate, and you have to give us reasons why you think this, or why you have to make the argument that minorities are not as smart as whites. And I feel a little weird about this. I'm thinking, well, I don't believe it. Why would I try to make an argument for it? And the reason why is because that's what you do with a debate, is you analyze both sides of the argument. You may not believe one side of it, but you certainly want to open your mind to that side of it. If even though it's uncomfortable, at least you know that there are a group of people out there that think minorities are not as smart as white people. And if you close your mind to the negative or the uncomfortable or whatever you find your normalcy bias being tampered with, then you most certainly are not going to have a well-rounded education about anything. You're going to go along with your own ideas, your own normalcy bias, and your own things that basically you say, well, this is the truth. Well, no, it's the truth as you see it. So
I'm really.
People have different truths,
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because I've always said that, I loved going to debating club as well back in school, and I genuinely like taking on the topics that people just, shied away from. And I remember Christmas special one year was, Santa Claus doesn't exist and we shouldn't be lying to children. It was something a bit provocative, and obviously everyone's exclaiming, saying, no, it's a part of childhood. I love Santa Claus, etc., etc. And I'm like, okay, I'll argue for hating Santa, and then there was another really extreme one about Jesus definitely doesn't exist, again, super provocative. And they were the most interesting ones to do, not because I believed in them, but because the exploration of the idea was, the part where I really started learning.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't know, I've told this story many times about my experience meeting Stephen Hawking, and the discussion we had was whether or not Santa Claus existed. And he put into terms that he would say, well, using Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, we can prove that Santa Claus exists. Using quantum mechanics, we can prove that Santa Claus exists. If we reduce him down to tachyon particles, and we'll have every tachyon particle enter into human beings at Christmas time with the spirit of giving, he exists. He's basically whittled away at certain arguments saying that, Santa Claus, rather than being human, he's either some sort of form of power, or that, he also told me, he says, well, Santa exists in the ether, and try to tell a child that's shaking hands with him in the ether if he's real or not real. They'll say he's real. And he says, if you believe that thought forms are provocative enough to create realities, that in some universe somewhere, some parallel universe, there really is a Santa going door to door, dropping off toys. And if we most certainly add in the idea of quantum physics, then you'd be standing at the North Pole and you'd see Santa leave, and he'd be right back the moment he left. The moment he came back, it would be so quick that you wouldn't even notice his sleigh moving.
Exactly.
Because, it'd be like he never left, because he's going so fast doing accurate delivery of all these toys around the world. And I just said it was just a fascinating, because he brought up the thing. He says, now let's see, how can Santa be in several places at one time? And he said to me, he says, well, take email, for example. He says, you write out an email, and he says, then you have a down line of people that you're sending an email to. You push a button, and let's say you have millions of people on your email list. You push a button, and those millions of people see that message all at once. So that's how Santa travels, Boom,
Wow.
he's there, and he's in several places at once, and that is the message of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. I thought it was kind of a beautiful thought, It's not that I'm thinking that some red guy in a suit and beer is going to come down my chimney or even out of my microwave.
Right.
I just think that it's just a fascinating thing to explore and to make arguments for.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you believe it. You believe it. It just means that you've done the research to try and bring people to that idea. I mean, that's why successful lawyers exist, because they create that doubt, or they create that ability for people to go, well, what if? What if this happened? Or what if? And that's, I love living in that world of what ifs while I'm on the radio, rather than living in, well, this is the way it is, and everything else is ridiculous. I think that's a joyless. I think that's a joyless position to have, and it makes you sound so rigid and no fun at parties.
Right.
That's the point. Are you going to be fun at parties? Are you great conversationalist? Or are you just some guy that's going to sit back and go, all this is like really weird?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And I totally agree, because when I often get into arguments, I'm one of those annoying people who's always super argumentative, and I get really annoyed when people say, oh yeah, but that would never happen anyway. I'm like, yeah, that's not my point. I'm just saying, theoretically, what if, it's a thought experiment. It's not a physical experiment, it's a thought experiment.
Well, use the words, I always use the words like, it appears to be, or it allegedly is.
I'm not saying it.
I'm not really saying it, but it appears to be this way. I don't think people, and you use words hypothetically, or, and all these other words, I don't think people really understand that we're using things like alleged and it appears to be. And
no, they attach it to you. Yeah.
Yeah. What you really are saying is that I don't know if I believe it, but it appears to be that way. So until I can touch it, smell it, taste it, or feel it with my own, hands, I don't know if it's real or not. It's like people who say, well, aliens don't exist and UFOs don't exist. And I'd say, well, okay, you ever been in a bank robbery? They go, no. And they said, how do you know it exists?
Right.
Well, bank robberies are real. You know they're real. And I go, no, I don't know they're real. And here's the deal. And have you ever watched on the news when a bank robbery happens? What do? They post some blurry picture of the robber that was taken on some cameras in the bank.
Yeah.
And you have to look at it and try and figure out who it is. And most of the time you can't tell because it's a blurry picture. And then if they do catch the guys who are allegedly the robbers in the bank, they don't even say, well, you're the robbers in the bank. They put them in a courtroom, and then a court has to decide if they're the robbers in the bank. They don't even do that with UFOs. It's like, UFOs don't exist. This stuff doesn't exist. Well, until you've experienced it, then you don't know. But plenty of people have experienced it. So what are you going to say to them? Are you going to say to them they're liars? Maybe some of them are, but are you really going to tell someone to their face who's had an experience that you haven't had that they're a liar just because you haven't had that experience?
Yeah.
I think it's really cruel to tell people you've never had that experience.
Absolutely.
And I don't believe you. And I think that's why debunkers are asinine because of that fact. There are skeptics, and true skeptics are the one that keep an open mind. But they kind of use the word skepticism as to be the debunker or the party pooper or the one that says, well, this can't happen and here's why. And I tend to just really, really find these people to be joyless, and I don't even want to deal with them.
Yeah.
No, it's like when you ask someone, well, have you ever seen an atom, an electron with your naked eye? And they're like, yeah, but I know they exist, right? I know they're there. And it's like, okay, I rest my case.
Another thing you can do, too, is you can say, can you prove that your parents love you?
True.
Yeah.
And they go, well, what do you mean? It's, well, what if I told you I don't believe your parents love you?
Yeah.
You'd say I was a jerk for saying that. And that's why, but you tell me your parents love you, but prove it to me. Prove to me your parents love you. What would you prove that your parents love? And they can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's because of the fact that it's something that is faith. It's something that's based on emotion. It's something that's based on belief. And you don't have proof that your parents love you. You think they love you, and you have faith that they love you. But to have somebody else to step on your toes and say, I don't think they love you, that would be just, that's just, in my opinion, just as sacred as your belief systems in God, your belief systems in anything else, and have somebody tell you that it's wrong, or to basically shake you and say, believe like I believe, I think is wrong. And I just don't appreciate that.
Yeah. A second ago, you were talking about firsthand experiences. And, for me, I remember I was very skeptical when it came to the paranormal until I got a chance to stay overnight at this abandoned haunted hospital that was out here in LA, Linda Vista Hospital. And, I saw some things and experienced some things that changed my mind. Obviously, Halloween just passed, so I have to ask, have you experienced anything paranormal in all your years of looking into these type of topics?
Yes.
Would you care to share some of these experiences if you would?
Gosh, I could give you a whole laundry list of things I've experienced in my life. Most of the strange and unusual things I have experienced in my life dealing with the occult. We're in South America, which had me fascinated with the occult and what people believe.
Right.
I mean, that's one thing. There were, when I was doing my show in Salt Lake City, I had a situation happen to me where I felt the presence of an entity sitting on my lap. And it led to an investigation into a murder that took place. A gang member and a young woman named Julie was shot and killed. And we were doing a seance, and she kept saying the words Looney Tunes, Looney Tunes, Looney Tunes. And we were thinking, what, did she like to watch cartoons, or what was going on with that? And come to find out, the man who killed her was a gang member who was known as Looney Tunes.
Oh, wow.
And that was something that we didn't know. And the police had to tell us, yes, he was the suspect in our case. I said, well, if you want to use spectral evidence, we have a ghost saying that her murderer was named Looney Tunes. So, but they didn't want to do that. But certainly it was an experience for me to, have the ghost, sit on my lap, or to, put its presence on me during a Ouija board session, which I thought was amazing. Just a number of things.
Could you tell us a little bit about the South America experience, if you could?
Well, yeah, most of it was, meeting up with curanderos, seeing how they operate. Curanderos, of course, are like the local witch doctors.
Yeah.
Healing processes that they do, and the idea that there are some very diabolical and evil type of or at least spooky type of people who stand out just outside the basilica. There was a man, I remember when I lived in Luján, near Buenos Aires, in Argentina. Luján was like the capital de la fe, they called it, the capital of faith. And La Madre de Luján was there. She was a huge statue that was the Virgin Mary, or not the Virgin Mary, but Mary. And it was amazing that this basilica was a beautiful two-tiered basilica that was there, and there were people there, and I'm not kidding you, that looked like they were from The Walking Dead.
Oh, wow.
Standing out in front of the church. And when I asked the priest, I said, who are these people? And they said they are degenerates from hell.
Wow.
They want to enter in, but they can't. And they were human beings, literally human beings, and their eyes were like kind of whitened and kind of weird looking. And I said, how long has this man been standing here? And at least a few days. And I said, has he eaten anything? No. Has he gone to the bathroom? No. And I remember getting as close as I could without getting freaked out. But yeah, they smelled of urine and feces, and they were standing there basically, not moving, staring at the church. Then eventually they would leave, or they would be told to leave by the police. But, they were just these frightening people who, for some reason, they, casting your eyes upon them, you wouldn't think they were demonic until you got close to them, and you could just feel this sense of, this loss of humanity in their souls, and how they didn't care for each other. They didn't care for themselves. And I don't know what that was about, but it was certainly something that freaked me out when I was down there.
That sounds quite terrifying. I don't think I've ever heard a tale like that.
I think I'd be more than just quite terrifying.
Yeah, no, that is something else. I skipped a few questions in the first hour, and I apologize. I want to give Clyde a chance to answer these real quick. One question comes from Kung Pu. Kung Pu on the chat room says, thinking of groupthink, which I've heard Clyde mention on Ground Zero, possibly the superconscious or Akashic records.
I'm not sure.
Or whatever is really the one. Okay. Akashic records, thank you. Or whatever is really the one running the quote-unquote secret government. So is the superconscious or Akashic records what's running the secret government, I believe is the question?
Well, if you think of the synarchy as being something like that, perhaps, I don't know. That could be one idea, how this is being run. I don't know. I'm kind of more fanciful in my thinking about the synarchy and how it would be like it's some advanced thought process or even an advanced machine that's running everything. I had a friend of mine who once told me, and he was in government, he said, what if I were to tell you that there are tentacles that reach out from a head that doesn't exist? This is what he's talking about. He says, well, there are all these groups that say they answer to a higher power, and there's a power over them, a power over them, a power over them, and it's infinite. And it is this unfinished pyramid that continues to go greater and greater and greater, and there's always this watcher that's taking care of it, but the watcher we never see, and yet we know it exists. And I said, well, that's kind of a very, very, a vague way of describing the power structure. But as I grew older and after talking with him, I was realizing that, this would mean that there is this synarchy where there is a power that is a power that we perceive to be a greater power than what we are, a more divine power or even a more corrupt power that is there to either destroy us or to create growth. And from the chaos comes order. It's just a matter of how you see your government as just a bunch of men that are capable of controlling the world, or a group of men who are answering to a higher power that has control of the world, that somebody is at the steering wheel of this spaceship that's hurtling through space around an orb of heat and magnetically charged particles. I mean, it's a very, very arduous task to be someone who controls the planet, and I don't think mankind has the ability to control it all by themselves. I just think we serve and we serve and we serve and we serve to something that we can't even put our finger on. Now, you can call it God, you can call it Satan, or you can call it aliens. I don't know what you'll call it, but it's certainly something that runs the world in a divine, orderly way, because there's so much chaos to deal with. So, yeah, that could be one way of looking at it, the Akashic records and what's in every one of our souls and cells and all that stuff. So, yeah, that's one thought. It's definitely a thought.
Professor Madness had a question. I believe this was around the time when the discussion was centered around health issues. Professor Madness asks if you think that depression is genetic.
If depression is genetic?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
specific and broad at the same time.
That is, I mean, I'm not a geneticist, and they say that mental illness can be genetic.
Yeah.
But if that's the case, then most of us would all be crazy because most of us, some of us have at least someone in our family that's had mental illness in one form or another. It's inevitable now. I can't remember how many people I've talked with, who I've associated with, who I've known, who've told me that they've had a relative, either a mother or a father or someone else that's near them that had mental illness, whether it be bipolar or depression, or they were suicidal, or, I mean, I think it's the product of this toxic environment. I think more so than anything else. I think that we have, when we, what do they call it, I'm trying to think of Axon, is it Axon or Axon? I can't remember the name right now. I'm sorry, it's late. I'm trying to figure out, it's the synapse that's in the brain that can be reprogrammed or rewired. And I think that the brain is something that we don't understand fully. I think there's some people that know the tricks to make the brain think certain ways and to go certain directions. And I think that now, I mean, there could be those who are genetically apt to become, either mentally, dysfunctional or what have you. But I think that I really think that, serial killer, I don't think there's a genetic code for serial killer, nor is there a genetic code for, loser and lethargic. I think that we are the ones who construct monsters or conjure monsters and build beasts. And it's because of the environment that we have and the environment we choose to continue to propagate in the zeitgeist or somewhere else. And I think that, some people are affected by it more than others, and some people lash out. And I was once told this very important thing, and that somebody told me, Clyde, what is a monster? Because I don't know, maybe somebody who's wicked or does evil things. And I said, no, a monster is a person that quits pretending. And I found that very profound.
Wow.
That you're a monster when you stop pretending to be good, when you stop pretending. I mean, you literally have a disgust for humankind. You literally have a disgust for those around you.
A bitterness.
And instead of pretending to care, you just decide you don't want to care anymore. And that's when you realize that you've become a monster.
And I agree with you. I think that the environment that we live in is a breeding ground for a lot of the situations that people, end up, being in as far as their mental health is concerned. Speaking of that, I also believe as part of the reason why people look to someone that can guide them or help them through life, if you will. And that's where a lot of, cults come into play. And I was reading something really interesting. Let me know if it's accurate, but apparently you were the focus of the FBI at one point for a comment you made on March 25th, 1997. It seems that it was a full moon that night, and you said something...
Heaven's Gate comment.
Yeah, this would be a great night for a cult to commit suicide.
For a cult to commit suicide,
I was in Colorado at the time, and I was in my teens, and I remember at night we could see the Hale-Bopp comet, and it was quite impressive. And obviously, shortly thereafter, the news came of this cult, and I remember the images on TV where they're engraved in my mind. Who can forget, these people in their bunk beds, covered up with these black Nikes that, it became, like I said, it was an image that was etched in my mind, and it has been there ever since. And obviously, when I read this, it kind of took me back to that place. There really, there was no way that you would know that something like that would happen. But what was that experience like, being singled out for that comment and being, the subject of an FBI investigation?
It sounds greater than it is. I mean, the FBI investigation consisted of a phone call and 2 visits, talking with, the FBI, only from the standpoint of that, I first made the comment, which was accidental and coincidental, and second, it was because of the fact that I had contact with a singer in a band called Dharma Combat. And the young man who was the singer joined the Heaven's Gate cult, was one of the members of the OA team. In fact, he was one of the counselors.
Oh, wow.
And they wanted to know what I knew of him, and I just said, well, he'd written me several times because he seemed to be this conspiracy theorist. And he actually believed, like most people do, the alien landing would be a fake alien landing than the real one. Okay. Which is interesting because of the reason why he decided he wanted to leave the planet was because, they were convincing all the people who followed the Heaven's Gate cult that, there was some sort of companion behind the Hale-Bopp comet. And so my comment that night was innocuous, I thought, because I was outside before the show started, and actually I looked in the sky and I saw I think that Hale-Bopp was its closest to the Earth, and so I got to see it in the sky, during dusk, and it was a night too where the moon was eclipsing, and so it had that red tinge to it, like the tetrad moons we were just experiencing. And it just, to me, looked like, the sky reminded me what the end of the world would look like. And if the end of the world had a look, it would be, the sun setting and all the colors in the sky, a comet coming down, and maybe a blood red moon all at once.
Right.
And so I was on the air, and I said, ooh, it's looking really spooky out there, everybody. I said, it seems like a good night that people who are lunatics and crazies and even cults would commit suicide. And I don't know what made me say it, but I did. And it was kind of like, one of those things that, I just said a destructive cult. I didn't say cult, but destructive cult. And then the Heaven's Gate cult committed suicide a couple days after that. And it was weird because that night I actually was talking about the Phoenix Lights of all things.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so, here I was talking about the Phoenix Lights, talking about the moon, and talking about Hale-Bopp. And it was quite interesting how that all came together. And they were saying that there were a number of things that I was talking about on my show that they were wondering would have triggered, the possible. And they were citing my show. They were citing the Art Bell show. They were citing every show that was pushing this Courtney Brown theory of the Hale-Bopp companion. And so that's why they investigated it, because they just wanted to know if there were anything that was being said on these radio programs that would have triggered this type of response. And I said, well, you got me dead to rights, yes, because we talk about these stuff. And you have me talking about, it'd be a great night for weirdos and cults and whatever to commit suicide, because, the only thing I had was the Jonestown, situation where they committed suicide. Or some crazy religious cult, and I thought, okay, and how was I to know there were 39 people taking their lives, in San Diego? But I wasn't shocked by it by any stretch of the imagination.
That particular incident was quite, I don't know, maybe because it was, I guess it was like my Jonestown in a way, right? Like you always remember the event. Like, I remember the Berlin Wall and things like that. And actually another amazing thing, when Roger Waters played The Wall in Berlin shortly after. But yeah, no, I think it's definitely those events that you are there to witness and experience that really mark us. And yeah, no, like I said, the whole Heaven Gates thing, to this day, we have the Museum of Death over here in Hollywood, and they have some of the, I don't know what you would call it. I think the official term is something like murderabilia or something. But yeah, they have a little section there where they kind of did a mock-up of what happened with some of the stuff that, I guess belonged to members of Heaven's Gate. Another thing that I wanted to ask you about, because this is also, quite fascinating. Clyde, you have led a very, very fascinating life, no question. And I was reading that apparently you had an encounter with Men in Black. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've had several actually. One was a more personal one. There was they've all been personal. I guess you put it in that direction. The Man in Black that told me that I need to remove a photo off my website at the time. The internet was fairly young at the time, because of course most people didn't have full-on websites until after around 1994, 95. This was around 1996, and what had happened is I was offering just for fun this guy that I knew named Scott Mahalik, and he's still a guy that I associate with my show now. He's a remarkable manager, overseer, controller, helper. He's a number of things. He's got all these hats. And at the time, he was an executive that I was working for, and he said, hey, let's come up with this idea to offer $10 million for a UFO, full-fledged one landing in our parking lot, and we did it for a publicity stunt. This was back when Ground Zero was like into, pretty much being. I was more of a, I guess you could call me a. I don't know what you could call me. I was more looking at it from a skeptical, smart-ass way of doing this, and so I thought offering $10 million for a UFO would give me a lot of publicity. And what I got is I got a man showing up, showing me a picture of what he took, looked like an alien in the west deserts of Utah, near where they do the weapons testing. And I thought it was an amazing picture, and I posted it on my website, and the news did a story on it. And while I was there was a man who showed up who said that he wanted to investigate the threat of raping apparently on our radio station, they said something to the effect that one of our talk show hosts put out he encouraged a number of people to go out and rape the daughter of a local official. And I said, I don't think anybody on our station would do that.
Right.
And they said, well, what had happened is he talked to the program director, and he said, I need to speak to the production manager. And at the time, that was me, and I was also a news guy and a few other things. I was news, production, all kinds of things. You wore many hats back in those days when you're doing radio.
Right.
And so I said to the man, I said, I don't have anything on tape or anything where, the talk show host had said anything like this. In fact, I know everything that comes and goes on the studio. And he says, so you're Clyde Lewis, right? And I said, yeah. He says, you do Ground Zero? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, you have a picture of the West Desert alien? And I said, yes, I do. And he says, can you show it to me? And I put it up on my website, and I go, are you with the government? And he says, I'm not at liberty to say.
Oh, wow.
I said, well, you look like a government type. You look like one of those, men in black. I said to him kind of, half jokingly, and he didn't laugh.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, well, I'll show you this anyway. And I showed it to him, and he said, do you have any knowledge of what this might be? And he says, I'm not at liberty to say. And I said, is it an alien? He says, I'm not at liberty to say.
Oh, wow.
He said, I said, what are you? I said, what are you at liberty to say? And he said, I'm at liberty to say you better take this down.
Oh, wow.
I said, why? He says, because you're making an ass out of yourself. I said, what? You come here to tell me that I make an ass out of myself because I have a picture of an alien on my site? He says, it's not an alien. And I said, well, then what is it? He says, I'm not at liberty to say. I said, well, I'll tell you what. Until you can tell me what it is, I'm leaving it up on my website. And he says, you better not. I said, I'm going to. Well, after, I don't know how long it was, maybe a day or two went by, and all of a sudden the mom and pop organization that had my website up at the time was like KDCOL.com or something. It was some mom and pop thing. It wasn't like some big group, that has it now, or you go to like Comcast or someplace to have your internet. There was like these little mom and pop organizations that did the internet.
Yeah.
And hopefully wanted to make a lot of money. Well, they went in and they threatened to shut down this place that was providing me with internet unless they had the picture taken down. So they shut down my website. They took the picture offline, and I said, well, I still have it. And then I went on the air and I made this big stand saying this is infringing on my freedom of speech. How dare they? Blah 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 blah. And a few days after that, I remember getting in my car one morning to come in and do the news. And when I got in my car, I tried starting it, and it backed up just right as we were backing out of the carport in this apartment complex. It was a cold morning, I remember that. As I pulled out and backed up, the car conked out. So I'm thinking, it may be cold, I got to give it some more gas. I gave it some more gas, I started it, and all of a sudden, it was like slow motion. I saw this big ball of flame in a flash come right at me, and it broke the glass.
Oh,
Immediately, the front part of my car was on fire, and so I didn't know what to do. I was thinking, oh my God, it's going to be like in the movies, everything's going to explode, and I'm going to be dead. And so I hurried and got out of the car, and then I thought to myself, oh my God, it'll burn the carport, so I better push it out. So I went to grab the steering wheel, and the steering wheel melted. It was melting.
Oh,
and
wow.
It kind of like, it was in my hand, like falling apart.
That's crazy.
So I threw the car into neutral, and I went to back it out, and I put it in the middle of the parking lot. And there it was burning in the parking lot, and it was really weird because it was burning. The horn was like honking. I don't know why it was honking, but it was honking. I think it was because it honks, if any of the wires, get burned or anything. So it was honking, kind of alarm you. They caught the cars on fire. And what had happened is the fire department showed up, and they looked it over, and the one guy said to me, he says, "Do you want to call the police on this?" I said, "Why?" So I started my car, and it's caught on fire, and it's no big deal. He says, "No." He says, they whoever did it was a vandalism. And I go, "Well,
wow.
What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, we detect magnesium. We detected magnesium in the car." I said,
wow.
"Magnesium, like flash powder?" And I said, "Yeah." So they said that this is an old way of blowing up a car. And I said, "What's that?" And he says, "They cut the fuel injectors. So when you put the gas on, gas shoots into the spark plugs. And when you turn on the car, the spark plugs ignite the gas.
Oh,
and then
my
if
God.
there's a dynamite pack or something that would be affected by the fire, it would explode." And what they estimated is that what it wasn't a bomb to kill me, it was a bomb to scare me. And so it was like loaded with taped magnesium.
Wow.
And so that's what happened. And I said, "Wow, that's amazing." And then a few days later, some guy shows up at my house with a videotape player, and he says, "I'm here to, tape you talking about what happened to you for insurance reasons." And I know the insurance lapse on the car, so I didn't know why he wanted to do that. And so what had happened is that I stood there and I talked with him, and then he took this little micro tape out of this camera. I had never seen anything like it before, and he handed it to me. I go, "What's this?" He says, "This is what you were saying." And I said, "I thought this was for insurance purposes." And he says, "Yeah, it is for insurance purposes." I go, "What kind of insurance then?" He says, "Ensuring that you'll never open your mouth again when we tell you to shut up about something."
Oh my God.
And he took off, and I ran after him, but I couldn't keep up with him. He got in a van and drove off and never saw him again. And it was then when I really got serious about what I was talking about and realized I couldn't be a smart aleck anymore.
Wow.
And the thing was, it wasn't an alien, as far as I know. I was told by a bunch of military people that it was, they're actually testing an invisibility cloak or invisibility type of uniform for soldiers. And the thing is that it was they said that they used water packs in order to reflect the surroundings around the soldiers so it wouldn't be seen. And so for some reason the camera caught this like mirage-looking image of what appeared to be an alien, but what it was a soldier with his army hat on and his army helmet on and these dark goggles and a microphone on his mouth.
Wow.
That's something you can see now in a video game, but back then it was a new kind of uniform they were testing, and actually, they were worried it was going to violate national security if I showed it on the internet. Wow. So I waited about 10 or 15 years before I could show it again, and I put it on my website as a lesson to anyone who, just because they come after you and tell you not to show anything or talk about it, it's not because it's an alien. It could be something they don't want you to reveal to the public because it's a matter of national security.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's kind of weird.
No, that's incredible. That's I mean, it's literally unbelievable that that could happen. It blows my mind. It really does. Clyde, we're quickly running out of time, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on this CERN business. The Large Hadron Collider. When I read articles on this, it sounds really scary. And we talk here on the show, and Genevieve tends to be the sober half of this show. She tells me that, well, it's science, and and these are experiments. There's nothing nefarious about it. In my head, I can't help but think that maybe the U.S. has one of them in one of the these secret underground bases. For all we know, should we be?
We have several colliders. We have the one in Lawrence Livermore. We have one in New York. We have colliding. The colliding business has been around for a long time. But not one that big, and not one that has that much power.
Yeah.
Right.
And not one where they're claiming that they want to open up portals, and not one where they're claiming they want to find the God particle.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's not, in my opinion, it's not that it's nefarious. And that's the thing I don't want people to think, is when I'm mentioning this, it's not that it's nefarious. It's just that it's damn risky, and it's like, it's like when they wanted to set off the atomic bomb, they had no idea what would happen if they set that bomb off. They had no idea. They thought it would cause they were thinking it would cause the entire atmosphere to explode, and then from there there'd be a chain reaction and wipe out the entire universe. But it didn't happen, and thank heaven it didn't happen. Now we're still here. See, the Hadron Collider at CERN, there's the same scares about it that are concerning and are fascinating, and so the idea is that we report it, and there are a lot of coincidences and stuff.
Yeah.
But chances are, science has it under control. At least we hope so. But there's no guarantees. Yeah. And so if anything goes wrong, there's always a big oops involved, or I'm sorry, and sometimes I'm sorry doesn't cut it. Mm-hmm. And so the fear is not that it's nefarious or they're using it against us. The fear is that they're tampering once again with these powers that are just perhaps maybe too big for mankind to handle. And so they end up, killing us all. They end up wiping out Europe, or they end up, you never know what's going to happen with that. And it's a lot of power for mankind to have. And, and so that's the worry. I don't think anyone out there who thinks that there's something nefarious going on, they're reading too much into it. But, anything with that much power can be used for evil as well as good.
Right.
It just depends on what your idea of evil is. If you think that using a device like the Hadron Collider as a means to open up portals and try to find the gods or something, if you look at that as being evil, then yes, it is. If you look at finding the God particles to prove that the Big Bang existed and that perhaps God doesn't, and you think that's evil, then yes, it is nefarious and it's evil. But if you look at it from a scientific perspective, saying that this will give us new insight on how the Earth was formed, how the universe was formed, if you see time travel or opening up dimensions is something that we need to do, and it's something that is important to explore new worlds, then no, it's not nefarious at all.
Yeah.
The only thing is my problem with it is that it's such a risky thing. Is it worth all of the trouble? Is it worth all of the power? And is it worth all the risk? Yeah. Apparently they think so, and apparently they are so maniacal about doing it that they don't weigh the consequences. They think that what they're doing is going to be for the perfection of mankind. And even if it does create some problems down the road, it doesn't matter because they are right and we're wrong. And, and that's the frightening part.
No, it's true. It's true. So, Clyde, what can I say? This has been, it's been a roller coaster, and we got a chance to walk in your shoes for about 2 hours. And let me tell you, you're a brave man. You're an honest man. And I appreciate you taking the time, to be with us tonight and talk about all these things. For the few people out there that maybe haven't tuned into your show, why don't you let us know when and where people can catch Ground Zero Radio?
Ground Zero Radio airs from 7 to 10 Pacific time. We're on 200 stations across the country. You need to check your local listings, usually on an AM station that carries shows like George Norrie. We're usually on that station. Let's see what else. We're online at soundcloud.com/Ground Zero, I think radio or media, one of the two. And you can also hear us by going into TuneIn or you can look at, there's so many places, iTunes, iHeart, so many places you can tune into the show. Talk radio networks, places where online there are talk radio shows, usually we're found there. So we're a 3-hour show. Some markets only get like an hour or 2 hours. Yeah. So if you want to get the full effect, you can listen online and get the full 3-hour effect of the show, which I prefer because, I used to do 5 hours. And now 3 hours, I have to cram a whole lot of show into one big bag. And sometimes it's a challenge, but we manage to do it, and it's really awesome.
It's definitely,
I like doing what I do.
It's definitely a quality show. I highly recommend it. And you got Ron Patton over there helping you out. And like I say, he's a great guy, knowledgeable guy. So nothing but good things to say about Ron. So I'm really happy that he's out there. And check out groundzeromedia.org. Don't forget that on Twitter, it's at Clyde Lewis, and on Facebook, facebook.com/Ground Zero Radio. Clyde, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
And I think a lot of thanks on behalf of people in the chat. There have been a lot of questions coming in. We unfortunately didn't have a chance to ask them all, but I know they appreciated you being on the show.
You were definitely blowing minds tonight.
I'm glad they're out there. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for your questions. And, feel free to email me at groundzeropdx@yahoo.com. I try to get as many letters as I can, get to them and answer them. Not always easy, but I try to. So if you'd like to email me, groundzeropdx@yahoo.com, I'd love to hear from you.
Nice. You're the man, Clyde. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
And have a great rest of your night.
I will, and happy Dia de los Muertos.
Yes, happy Dia de los Muertos. Absolutely.
And have some carnitas and some mezcal.
Oh, that's definitely on my list.
Not before going to sleep and getting hungry again.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Thanks,
Good
Kyle.
night.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Wow. That was... what more could you ask for in an interview, correct?
Well, you know, people every now and then they're like, why didn't you talk much during this show or that show? Or when I don't talk much, it's because I'm listening, right?
Yeah.
Or just because I'm so overwhelmed with all the information. It's when I don't say that much, it's always a good
it's rare.
sign.
It's rare. But yeah, tonight I saw that, and I respect that because
Frank's gonna have Clyde on more often now.
Yep. Clyde
Just
will be
'cause of
here.
that.
three Sundays out of them every month. Compal says that he or she, I'm not sure if we got this, but they're ground
It's
zero.
definitely Kung Pu, by the way.
Kung Pao, I keep saying, right?
Yep.
Somebody's hungry and wants to go to Panda Express. That's all I'm going to say. No, like I said, Clyde Lewis, great guy. Check out the radio show. He's, amazing. And like I said, they tackle some
was
heavy...
originally a Ground Zero listener.
So
that's how every now and then we get discovered. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. So and a big thanks to Clyde, because we were actually on his show a few weeks ago, I think now.
Oh gosh, it was over
almost a month.
Way over.
Yeah, no, I think it was.
Over.
It was over a month. Wow.
Definitely.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it.
Because we're in November.
Yeah,
that.
you can check out that show. We were talking about Elisa Lam that night, and
we have a big article coming up.
There's a huge article coming up.
I've been working on this for about a month. All right,
this
guys.
is. I mean,
It's
I'm not gonna.
Yeah, it's one of those.
Yeah, it's gonna be a very thorough article. And I think Genevieve is onto something here. I believe, and I'm not saying it because you're sitting next to me, but I believe that it'll definitely should be and will become the reference point for a lot of people that maybe there's so much information floating around about this particular case, and what you're trying to do is just kind of put everything together,
just
curate it, collate it. And put it out there for people to check out. So be on the lookout for that. If you miss any part of this interview, go to WoTRradio.com, and the next day or two, you're going to find it there, along with some other cool stuff. We have some kamikaze stuff. We got some really interesting interviews that happen there.
Super cool pictures coming up tomorrow in an article about the Paris catacombs.
Yes, because it's Dia de los Muertos.
So what better way to celebrate than showing pictures of dead people?
Yep. About what, like 6 million, I think, remains?
6 million.
It was an experience.
Miles.
It was an experience being down
miles.
there. And so be on the lookout for that as well. So a lot of cool stuff coming up. WoTRradio.com. Subscribe to the podcast. It's there on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, TuneIn, and a bunch of other stuff.
And just for clarification, it's Mr. Kung Pu.
Oh, Mr. Kung Pu, I apologize. Accept my humble apologies. That being said, we're going to go out with a song that, man, I love this song. Talking about the Paris catacombs. If you watch the video to this, and this is an early video, it has some great images of the Arc de Triomphe and other sites of Paris back in the 60s and 70s, like around that era.
Before it was built up, you can see the pictures. There's no high rises
It's
yet.
beautiful. It's nostalgic, and this song takes me back. I don't know why. I don't know. It takes me back. I don't even know where, but it takes me back, right? It's so weird.
It takes you back to somewhere you weren't even at.
Yeah. So, but I love it, and I think it's a good song to sign off with and send our friends to bed if that's where they're going. Get some rest. Depends.
If you're catching us on iTunes, it may be any time of day, but enjoy the rest of the day either way.
Either way. So here's the Muddy Blues, Nights and White Satin. Take care. Be safe. God bless. Don't do anything too crazy. We want to see you back next week. Genevieve, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
West of the Rockies with Frank the Engineer on the Independent FM, Los Angeles.